speaker, and we are fortunate to have her in at Eastern Illinois University. I have listened to her presentations before and have been impressed with her type and quality of presentations. She is the president of something, and she got
Illinois
award of
Council,
something.
yeah, Illinois Council of Family
Say,
Relations.
say it slowly again.
Illinois Council on Family Relations.
I try to
Yes.
practice this name.
That's okay.
But you are.
That's okay.
You got an award for something there.
Mentor, Faculty Mentor Award.
Mentoring.
Yes,
Excellent.
yes.
And if you can't say Oyindamola, say Oyinda, right?
All right.
Right. It means honey, and what?
Well,
And wealth. So if you forget Oyindamola, say honey, like honey, and wealth. So what you can ask for. And you pronounce your last name for them.
Idowu.
Idowu.
All right.
Idowu. Can you say that? Idowu. Very good. So we have two distinguished speakers. She is a student in the master's program, and you want to read her research, look at her reports, her mind, how she listens to a lecture and goes and searches, and she makes my days, made my days best and say, after class, I went and researched this, and I found this, and so forth. Ideal student. And look for her name in the future. Maybe she'll minister or something somehow. So without much ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Mikki Meadows.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. My area is early childhood, so my presentation talks about family life, marriage, gender roles, things like that. But since we're going to talk about that later, I'm going to kind of zoom through that and focus a lot on children and children's behavior and play. So that's the focus for tonight. So we'll start with marriage and family, and I'm going to go ahead, like I said, just zoom right through this. Males tended to marry older in ancient Greece, so they were around 25 to 30, generally because they were finished with their service to the country at that time. Females were much younger, and so they were younger because they wanted to ensure that their virginity was still intact. The gender roles are what we might imagine them to be, or have heard them to be. The partners were chosen for the females because of their young age. The female's family did pay a dowry to the husband, and when she was, in which she was passed on to him, they might not even meet each other. They did move into the same home, and that constituted the wedding, the marriage. It was almost like, I don't know, what I would kind of consider a compound almost. Often the women didn't even leave the home except for church, things like that. So marriage was very different. And the reason I'm going through this is because children play what they see. So in order to understand children's play, we have to have a little tiny window into what adults were doing, of course, at that time. Mm-hmm. And like I said, gender roles, things like that. Divorce did occur. So again, I'll put, whoops. Got too excited there. Divorce did occur, but the children would often stay with the father if divorce occurred. So that's kind of interesting and something that I found, of course, very different. It wasn't that the father was interacting with the children. It was the father's ownership of the children and the family. So it wasn't, like today, if we had a divorce, if the father was with the children, he would be the caregiver, interact with the children. That's what we would expect. And that's not why that happened in ancient times. Again, it was because of the ownership issue. Yeah. The role of the women was to care for the family, and that was the basic role. So childbearing, of course, was a priority, and child rearing was a priority. Again, wealthy women really didn't leave the home. They just focused on the home, the children, caring somewhat for the husband, caring for the enslaved individuals that lived in the home. But that was pretty much the focus. She did have authority over the people in the home, authority over the children, and authority over enslaved individuals, but it was limited to, that small area of, her existence. You can stop me if I'm going too fast, because, like I said, I'm going to zoom through. So again, childbearing was extremely important for women, just like it often was, in ancient times in parts of the world. Generally 4 to 5 children, so less than you might think. 6 to 8 pregnancies, about half of the children, would live at any time. Childbearing occurred in the home. It was assisted by other women, so she wasn't alone. The father controlled most of the decisions, though, related to childbearing. So, for instance, once a child was born, the father would see the child, and depending upon the sex of the child, whether the child was healthy or not, of course, if there was any question of illegitimacy, if the child had any issues, disabilities, anything like that, then what could happen was called exposing the child. And what that meant was they would basically put the child outside in a pot or a basket or something, and hopefully somebody would come and claim it, but if not, of course the child would just perish. But basically what they were saying is, we don't want any responsibility for that child. And that was all the father's decision, and that was called exposing the child. After 5 to 7 days after childbirth, there would be a purification ceremony. Because again, in many male-dominated societies, things like childbearing, menstruation, things like that are seen as impure, evil, almost a defilement of the home. And so the home would have to be purified, and everybody that worked with the mother during childbearing would have to be purified as well. At that point then, once purification occurred, you could no longer expose a child. So by then the child was part of your family. Still wasn't named, though, until about day 10 or 10 days old. And that's, they believe, because of the fact that many children didn't live past the first week or so, and they wanted to make sure that the child was going to be really a part of the family before they bestowed a name on the child. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Females were not educated. Go ahead and put those up again. They did stay with their mothers. The mother educated them in, again, of course, how to care for the home, how to care for other children, things like that. Enslaved children were not educated either, as you might imagine, and poor children were not educated. It was for the wealthy. Boys were educated from about 17 to 13, and we hear a lot about the ancient Greek education. So again, I'm going to skip right through that. Generally, about 1 teacher to 10 to 20 boys. It's very interesting when you read about ancient Greece. They have so many similarities in the way they look at childhood and the way they look at children. Even in their educational systems, it was really similar to some of the developmental approaches that we use, saying that you teach children according to their developmental level, which makes sense, but we don't always do that intuitively. So things like that, they were actually doing in ancient Greece at the time. So that small classroom, one-on-one education, things like peer education, so older children teaching younger children, all of those kind of things that are seen as very dynamic and creative right now were actually occurring in the schools with the boys. Okay, gender roles. This is the last one I'm going to zip through. Gender roles, again, females were very much in a subordinate position to the point that they actually didn't even have their own names. They had a form of their father's name, and when they were married, they were given a form of their husband's name. So they were very much seen as under the protection, the care, and of course the authority of their fathers and their spouses. But it's very interesting because males were in such a position that actually they thought it took longer to have a boy child. So they thought that, so gestation is the time from conception to childbirth, the nine months basically. And many people believed that it actually took longer to grow a boy than it did to grow a girl because they were so much more complex. Isn't that interesting? But they thought it was harder to bear a female child because males were just easier and easier to manage and, again, superior. So these ideas even filtered into childbearing and mothering and gender roles and things like that. Okay, here's what I was waiting on. So, toys and games in society. Acculturation is the way that adults, well, generally adults, it can happen at any point, but for my purpose, it's the idea of transmitting the rules of the culture from one generation to another generation. And so Meyer Fortes in the 1930s and 40s wrote about the role of games and play in enculturating children, and the fact that that's how adults draw children into society is through game playing with them. And that's how children then in turn learn about society. So we think that children are just kind of off playing and enjoying themselves, and they are, and that's good. But basically what they're doing is they're interacting with their culture, with their environment, and they're learning about what people are doing in a day-to-day, in their day-to-day roles by playing out. And so that's why you see children, they very, very often are either playing with kitchen toys, right? You see them play with kitchen toys, or they're building things, pretending to do the things that they see the adults doing. And so what adults do then is through adult interaction with children's play and games, we then either perpetuate, the behaviors that we want to see, or we kind of smush down behaviors that, don't fit in with our culture, mush in with our culture. So acculturation was a huge part of play in ancient Greece for children. The play of children of ancient Greece is actually extremely similar to what we advocate in the School of Family and Consumer Sciences. And that's, again, a developmental play. And that's a play that means that children are playing according to their developmental level. And play is very pure and for enjoyment and for social interaction. And so later I'm going to talk about some of the trends in children's play in overall society. But those of us that teach and study child development advocate play as play, pure play. And so what that means is children in ancient Greece and today didn't play for adults. They played for themselves. And that it sounds like that would be what children are doing, but think about what we do with children. So for instance, how many of you have ever had a child that just learned their colors, their ABCs, something like that, and then you drag them everywhere and say, now tell grandma how you know how to do your ABCs. Tell daddy your ABCs. And they're like little performing puppies, basically, for us, right? We get them all dressed up and we make them do tricks, and then we're like, yay, and they go, yay, And, then when they do something, anything now, then, I work in the child development lab, and these little children will climb up on something and then they'll go, like this, waiting on somebody to clap for them in play. They're supposed to be playing, and they're supposed to be enjoying themselves for enjoyment's sake. Now, when you guys go out and do something fun, do you do it for the approval of others around you and for praise and awards and things like that, or do you just go out and have a good time? But see, we often don't allow children to do that like they did in ancient Greece and like we advocate now. And so that was very interesting to me because I was all over the fact that they're doing everything that I tell people they should let kids do. So that was very exciting. So play was very what we would call pure in ancient Greece. So although they were learning the rules of the culture, they were doing it at their own pace and on their own time frame. And it was child initiated as opposed to adult initiated. Does that make sense? All right. See, I told you I'd slow down. I really slowed down, didn't I? They were preparing for adult roles. So play prepares children for adult roles overall, just because of interactions, learning to use materials, things like that. In ancient Greece, it was extremely purposeful. So for instance, both Plato and Aristotle wrote about adults that were good, maybe craftsmen, tradesmen, and male-oriented. But what they said is they must have played that a lot as a child. So there was this very clear connection between little boys that maybe built with blocks and then built when they were grown-ups. So they actually were they didn't push the play on children, but what they would do is they believed that children would naturally play what their aptitude was. So if they were going to be builders, then it would show up when they were young, and they would practice, with blocks and sand and rocks and things like that, and then be better builders when they were adults. So that was kind of interesting, I thought, too. The caregiving then is what the females did. So the females were given things like dolls. Little girls were given dolls and little, toys that they would pretend to be running a household or pretend to be working in a household, or even they believe enslaved children would pretend to be, their little dolls were working for people, were little people that were running the household. So that was kind of interesting, I thought. So the building, the caregiving, I skipped right over pretend play. But what pretend play does is it allows children to try on adult social roles. So you've seen children do that. I'll be the mommy and you be the daddy. I'll be the police officer and you be, the cat. I don't know. They do all kinds of things. But they're pretending, to be grown-ups, basically. They don't generally pretend to be other children, right? They pretend to do what they see us doing. And that was very common as well in ancient Greece. So some of the toys and games then that they have found, they did find that toys and games were extremely important, very much a part of childhood. So there are different ways that they figure that out. And of course, one of the main ways is through burial sites and what children, what they buried children with. It's not grammatically correct, but you know what I mean. So children would have, the little girls would be buried with things like dolls. The little boys would have balls, carts, wheelie toys, things like that. So that was one way, that we now look back and try to figure out what children were doing. But we never really know, whether it was ceremonial or whether they were really items the children played with. So that's one cue we have. But we also have things like decorative vases, lamps, things like that. And without fail, when children were pictured in art, they were playing in some way. So either playing with adults or playing with one another. So that's very interesting because we don't really see that now. So what we would call almost a formal portrait of children was them at play as opposed to posing and things like that. So that gives us another clue that play was very important in the lives of children. The most comprehensive information, though, that we have about ancient Greece and the toys and the games that were there is through the written word. And so some of the ancient writings literally have chapters, pages and pages describing the rules that children, used in games and things. So again, that's very important. You guys don't pick up a history book and read about, 3 chapters on the games they were playing during Civil War times, right? You're looking at other things. So for the fact that that's even included in some of the historical writings and appears more than one, repeatedly, seems to be a theme, again, gives us the idea that it was a very important part of life for the families. It was very much seen as an indicator of childhood. So when boys reached puberty, there were different rituals depending upon the time period, depending upon the status of the family, but they would actually give their toys away. It was like a ritual. So they would give all of their toys away and then move into being men at puberty. Girls would do the same thing. They would give their toys to different gods, whatever, God, again, depending on their wealth, on their, station in life, the time period. They would give their dolls and dishes and things like that to the gods the night before their wedding, then to symbolize, moving into a womanly role and adulthood. So games and toys were like a badge of childhood. We play games now as adults, or a lot of us do, and so we tend to be more playful as adults almost than my research showed that the ancient Greeks were. Now they had organized sports, obviously, things like that, but as far as just play, things like that, we didn't see that as much past childhood. So again, when children are represented, they're almost always playing. So we have the toys themselves that survive that we can study, and then the depictions of them just playing and playing and playing everywhere. And so this is actually a quote from Aristotle, and what I really like is, young things cannot keep still. And so that's really important, because at different time periods, we've been more respectful of children and their natural curiosity and their natural energy. And so this tells us that it was very child-centered and that children were expected to play and be messy and do all the things that we now in contemporary life think children should do. Do you guys have questions or anything? Comments? All right, so the types of toys that they found. The first toys seemed to be rattles. There were rattles of various sizes, though. This is a rattle that would have been filled, with something to make it rattle. And then this up here is a rattle, of course, where they slide back and forth. The little pieces slide back and forth. Rattles were made of a lot of different materials. They could be wood, terracotta. The more wealthier families would have metal, like bronze even, rattles. And one thing that was interesting is they're all different sizes. So they would have tiny little rattles, but they also had rattles that were large, about this big around. And they thought that what they did was adults would, hold them and mess with them to entertain the very young children. So they thought, so according to, most of the writings and things, the idea is that rattles were the first toys that they played with. There are also a lot of tops, and so some of these, these are very familiar toys, to us as well, and very sophisticated toys too, don't you guys think? This is a top that you wind, have you seen those, and you pull it out and it spins. But they also had them that you would hit with a whip, and that would make it spin. And so these were more the boys' toys. Rattles were for both girls and boys. These are more boy toys, but girls would play with them. But for the most part, when you saw the tops, you would see them, you would see boys pictured playing with them. Wheeled toys were very popular. There's a picture of a wheeled toy, and the last scene showed a wheeled toy. There are depictions of children riding those. Older children even would have little tiny miniature chariots and things, but many of them were used for children to learn to walk, just like we do now. And so they have old, I was going to say photographs, they're not photographs. They have old, there's actually a vase that I saw that had a child that was, a tiny child that was in what I would call a walker. It was a wooden structure, and the child is, walking around in it. So again, very, very similar to what we did. And that tells us as well that children were given more freedom. When you see children in things like walkers, that means that independence, learning to walk, learning to move on your own, that all of that is important, as opposed to a child that you would see that would be swaddled, and held close and not exploring as much. And then balls, of course. So sometimes the children would make their own toys, and balls were very common for them to make. So they would use the bladders of an ox or, animals, and they would smooth them and round them and, make them strong. They had leather balls. Most of those we know about because of the writing. Of course, they didn't, make it through to now. We don't have the artifacts to look at, but we have the written and the pictorial emphasis on balls. Balls, there actually are 5 different words for different types of balls that were used, throughout that time period. So again, mostly boys, but girls would play with balls as well. There are very few girls in some of the depictions with balls, mostly boys, but some girls. And they were, again, on up until, they were something the children would do on up until they gave their toys away and reached what they would call adulthood. Of course, dolls, and dolls were generally for females. I found the dolls to be extremely interesting because here are 2 examples. So this is considered to be a doll. They thought that it might have some kind of soft material making up the head and the arms, but you can see the little legs, hanging. But this is also a doll, and some of them were extremely detailed, articulated, which means they would move. They had almost not really an animatronic, but ones that would knead bread. It would have a little handle on it that would move back and forth, and the doll was actually made to where it would knead bread. They would walk. Dancing dolls were extremely popular at the time. So all kinds of different dolls doing household tasks, and that was considered to be very important. The dolls, you can see from this doll, the dolls were nude, which tells us that then they had cloth clothing. So if they had painted on clothing, then that would be very different. So what they speculate, and again, according to the writings, what they think is the little girls would actually make the clothes for the dolls, dress the dolls, and were very interactive with the dolls and very creative with the way they dressed them and what they had them do, which again is something that we like and we advocate. And like I said, the night before the wedding, they were given away. Knuckle bones, that's these pictures right there, the children playing knuckle bones, and those are knuckle bones. They were used for gambling, basically, playing kind of like, almost like dice. They did have some dice and domino kind of looking materials, but this was considered to be one of the most popular games of the time. And they would gamble with little nuts and berries and things when they were little. And there are quite a few writings about how the child has traded in his nuts for money and now is wagering with money. So I guess it's, kind of like I was talking about before. Maybe the kids that played knucklebones then grew up to be gamblers. I don't know. But there was a lot of gambling going on with children and adults at the time period. They had a lot of toy animals. And so this was kind of interesting to me too, because most of the animals that they have found and that have been portrayed have been just common animals that would be in their daily life, which again, we really like in early childhood. So there were a few examples of dolphins and lions and some of more exotic animals, but for the most part, they were oxen, dogs, the animals that would be in the children's daily lives. Interestingly, there weren't any nonsensical characters, any mythological characters. They haven't found any indication that children played with anything like that. It was either the balls, the games, or the dolls and animals were real world models of what they saw. So that's very interesting given our talking cars and bananas and, everything that we do now. So it's very different than what we do. And then, of course, they had games. So games that, strength and agility were considered to be very important. And so games like tug of war and, leading into, the sports type games. Okay, so what do we do now? So I'm going to move into contemporary views of play. Any questions or anything about? All right. So we have now something called edutainment, which to me is the worst word in the whole entire world. And, well, not in the world. I mean, there are worse words, but it's pretty bad in my area. And that's the idea of using play, using entertainment to educate children. And so what we do is we try to slyly slide in lessons when we're teaching, we're teaching children, and then we say it's through play. And basically what we're doing is we're doing lessons with them that are kind of fun, and we call that edutainment, and we think that that's play. So it's not new. Actually, Walt Disney used the term, and he's the first person in writing to use the term back in the 40s with his National Geographic, videos and things like that. But even things like Aesop's fables, so when you read a story, it has a moral lesson for the children. So we've been doing it, but in contemporary society, we've kind of gotten out of control with that. So we tend to believe that children are not really learning anything unless they have some kind of product or have memorized something or have something to show for it. I see that over and over in the child development lab. People will come pick up a 2-year-old child and say, oh, you didn't do anything today? Because they don't have a painting or a spaghetti necklace or something, whatever, to show their families. And I'll say, well, we blew bubbles, we took a walk, we rode in the elevator. Those are all really good things for 2-year-olds to do, and they're really fun. And we don't have any, documentation that they learned anything, but they do, So we're very focused on some kind of product, some kind of educational, background. We have this trickle down. So, back in the 80s when I started to go to college, I just got up one morning and came and took my ACT test. Now, when it came time for my sons to do it, they had prep classes. They had $75 books you had to buy on how to take, and that's okay. We're grown-ups. But what that does is it trickles down until you see things like Baby Einstein for preschool children and infants. And so you have computer programs to teach. My very favorite is teaching children how to get dressed. There's a computer program for that. And so it has a person, like a paper doll person, standing like this, and it's got clothes all over the place. And the children on the computer are supposed to click and drag the clothes. So like if they drag, underwear to the head, it'll go back where, it only stops if you put it in the right place. You know what I mean? So is that a good way to teach children how to get dressed? So the same people that will dress a child and say, leave your shoes on, you're driving me nuts, quit taking your shoes off and on. That's how children learn to dress. So they'll not let them play with clothes and sit them in front of a computer and say, oh, they love their computer, they're just learning all kinds of things, you know. So that's what we're seeing now. And so what I would like to see is moving back to the ancient Greek idea of just letting children play and understanding that, like Aristotle and Plato said, they're learning. They're learning about everyday life. They're learning about how to talk to one another. You know, everything they need to know, they're learning through play at young ages. And so appreciating that and giving credibility to just play is extremely important. I do have one more slide I want to show you. We also have a lot of technology now. And our technology, well, we've always had technology, I guess, but our technology now is often computerized. And so what happens is children are given things, and I have little videos, but I'm running out of time, so let me hurry. So like this little kitchen, that's a kitchen, basically, right? I mean, you know, that's what it is. And to the point that it even has things that will tell the children what to do. So when you turn on the water, it makes a water sound. There's a computer, you know, inside. It'll say things like, you should put the, you know, the dish in the oven, you know, things, and then they'll take it and put the dish in the oven, you know. So we don't like things like this in early childhood. What I would rather see is a great big box, and it can be a kitchen, or it can be an airplane, or it could be a space shuttle. It could be anything. This is just a kitchen. And they might pretend sometimes it's other things, but their imagination is already cut for them. You know, they're being told how to play. They're being prompted in things like, you know, fry your chicken now, put your macaroni and cheese in the refrigerator, these kind of things. It's very crazy to me. This is a walker to teach children how to walk, and oh my gosh, it buzzes, it sings songs, let me just show you a little while I talk, because it's actually very interesting. It amuses me because
Little ones to stand on their own 2 feet and encourage their first steps with the interactive First Steps Baby Walker from VTech. Ideal for babies from 6 months, this sturdy walker with detachable learning center is brilliant at introducing baby to letters, words, numbers.
so we've got all this going on. Encourages language development, sensory development. Anyway. Oops, I don't want to close everything here. Let me turn that off now. There's the part I like. It says, it even has a butterfly. Oh, wow, okay. So anyway, these kind of play activities, they shape the child's play. The child doesn't shape their play. Hinders imagination, and they cost a fortune. You've all heard the stories or seen it yourself. You know, you buy a child an expensive toy, and then they play with the box and the wrapping paper and put the ribbon on their head and, you know, all of that. So we don't really need to be doing that. So I'm running out of time. I'm going to stop. But brain development research does show that we don't have to do all of this. The ancient Greeks had it right. Just let children play. That acculturates them. It allows them to practice adult roles. We don't have to push our values and our ideas of play on children. So the more we can look back and at the way they did it and give credibility to play, let children play, then we think the better that they'll be as adults. So I'm finished. Any questions? Thank you.
Would you like to have any questions now or after honey wealth? You want to go now?
I'll
Okay.
turn it off while we're...
I have a question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Please, we have a microphone here for you. Not for the sound, but for the taping. So it goes to the
I
tape.
don't have any more questions.
No more. Say your name and then,
Calvin Jones. But I was just wondering if, well, basically, a couple of things. One thing you noted about how the children have a reliance on technology, because basically they're being told how to think and what to think and in what order to think it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to transition into adulthood,
Mm-hmm.
which is what we're being as adults told now, how to think, what to think, and if you don't think this way, then you're wrong. So it's like when the children click on a certain image or clothing item to put on, no, this doesn't go there. You
Mm-hmm.
know, there should be a period of time where they should learn this on their own. But just to quickly, that's one point. And another thing is how you mentioned. I just thought it was interesting how the back in ancient Greece, when the lady was only when she was about to become married, then she gave away her
Yes.
toys,
Mm-hmm.
and then signifying that her childhood is over. I
Mm-hmm.
just thought it was kind of funny because in today's society, at least in America, we as men retain those toys and we even get more
Get more, right. Try to
after,
find them again.
yeah, try to find them again.
Yes,
That's true.
yes.
So I just thought those were interesting
Yes.
points. I enjoy your presentation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Any other questions? I know you have. If you take notes, keep them, and we will go to the honey and the wells. How about that?
Okay. Thank you.
Would you please give our speaker?
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm glad you're here. My name is Oyindamola. Like Dr. Wabi said, don't try to pronounce it. I'd like to start off with a disclaimer. I will be presenting tonight about things that happened in the between the 4th and the 8th century BC. I was not born that time, and everything I'll say here tonight are from materials that I got from books here at the Boots Library and few books from a library in Canada. So this presentation is not a story my grandfather told me. So the ideal ancient Greek woman. Greek writers, mostly men, they were precise about their definition of an ideal woman. She was beautiful and she had a soft voice. She was intelligent only in terms of raising children and running the household. She had to be tall and fertile because childbearing was one of the major reasons why women were married at that time. She had to be passive and modest. Women were not expected to look at anybody in the eyes. They had to be submissive and silent, and if possible, totally invisible. So, Greek girls grew up. The first problem that a girl child would have was to be given the chance to leave. And like Dr. Meadows said, that's a decision that will be made by the father. For two reasons. One, they were considered an expensive addition to the household. They would require a dowry, and they do not carry on the family name. So that was a decision the father had to make. The girl's education was limited to what was needed for textile production, how to behave in the society, and just the basics of reading and writing. The girl will grow up in the gynecon, which is the woman quarters of the house. It's mostly private, and it will be on the upper part of the buildings. It was where the women raised their children, made fabrics, entertained their other female visitors. It was just their part, their little part of the house. And although the Greek woman was secluded, she was secluded to that part of the house. She was in charge of the entire household. She was the storekeeper. She was in charge of the slaves in wealthy homes. And like one of the sayings that I found says that a wife's efficiency was a factor that determined whether the household should prosper. So she was like a manager. And to me, it was just like a glorified domestic slave. She was like the head to the slaves and the children. These two pictures, although the primary roles of a wife was childbearing and textile production, this picture shows a woman spinning and the other pair of women weaving a fabric, I guess. And the ideal ancient Greek woman was expected to be silent. They said that a perfect woman was one of whom nothing was heard of, either good or bad. She was just silent the whole time. She lived her life in the background. and most times in the gynecon. Although they were secluded, they are vast paintings that show that women left the house at certain points in time, sometimes to fetch water, although that was something done by slaves in rich homes. The women left the house to visit the tombs of dead family members. They visited sanctuaries. They attended um, public performances. But during all of those activities, they had to be conspicuous to the point of invisibility. That painting shows a woman that was about to leave the house, and they had to wrap a veil around and cover up a large percentage of their face, and their neck were not expected to be exposed. Women that are found on the streets, not dressed like that, were considered to be prostitutes or slaves. And wedding in ancient Greece, or marriage, was more of a matter of obligation on the part of a man for the legal continuation of his family. So a man of about 30 years of age would be married to a girl between 12 and 15, and the girl was not even contacted. It will be a contract between the father of the bride and the groom. So the girl she may not meet the groom before the day of the marriage. And there was a time when the bridegroom will have to bring rich gifts to get the girl's hand in marriage, but that changed in later times, and the bride would actually have to contribute a dowry. That was the time that the fathers didn't want to keep their female children anymore. On the day of the wedding, the bride will be dressed. She will be washed and dressed by other older female relatives. And most times they wore white garments, which was assumed, which they believed was the color for religious ceremonies. So I don't know, but I think that's where we got the white wedding dresses that we now use from. And also they shared cakes at their weddings to symbolize the desired fertility of the union. So, like I said, I don't know, but we have wedding cakes now. I think it was a Greek thing. And at the night of the wedding, the father of the bride will make sacrifices to Artemis, who they believed was the god of fertility and childbirth. They would also give the toys of the girl to this goddess. Another thing they did was the groom would have to conduct the bride. And they said that the groom holding the bride on the wrist was like a sign of, I got you, or something. So that was custom. He had to hold her by the wrist. And sometimes he would conduct her to a new home on a chariot if it was a rich man. And if not, they would just go on foot. So the wedding or a marriage was a huge transition for a Greek girl. Because at age 12, when I guess I was still learning, to cross the street, she would abandon childhood and the same day enter into adulthood, leave her mother's care and transition into the care of a mother-in-law she never met. So it was a moment of crisis for Greek girls, according to documentation and documents that I read. And also at that time, because a new bride was anxious to bear a child, that was the only thing on her mind. So she worried about that. And at that time, childbirth was about 50%, constituted about 50% of mortality rate in women, because they didn't have advanced medical technology like we have now. So scholars believe that the ancient Greek woman had a lifespan of about 40 years because they had numerous pregnancies, although they believed that contraceptives were available at that time, but it was only affordable to the rich. So they had numerous pregnancies, and at about age 27, and maybe the woman is pregnant also, she's getting ready to give her first child out in marriage. So Greek women didn't live so long like we do now, but they didn't have too many things to worry about because the legal system was structured in such a way that all through a woman's life in ancient Greece, she had no right over her own existence. She was under the care of a father or a husband at every point in her life. Yeah, publicly and legally, the husband's will prevail at all times. Well, these women had no rights to vote, like some of you did today, I guess. But this is not to say that happy marriages were impossible in ancient Greece. Odysseus and Penelope were the happiest couple recorded in Greek literature. And like Homer said, he said that they listened and they paid attention to each other. Maybe it was an arranged marriage, but it looked like it worked out for them fine. So I was thinking, all of this, women were secluded. They could not vote. They could not even think for themselves. Then I began to wonder why. So why ancient Greek women were secluded was because the Greeks believed that women they lacked the ability to control their physical cravings. And so it was the role of the man in our life to help her maintain her dignity, even if it required lock and key or she had to be incapacitated. So that's why they were secluded. And why women had to lower their gaze at all times, they believed that the woman's gaze carried a lot of power, and it could render a warrior powerless. So women were expected to lower their gaze. It was a plot to diffuse what they assumed to be the woman's weaponry. Also, why the girls had to marry early? Well, they assumed that the uterus was the source of whatever illness a woman would have. So they had to marry early to make sure that does not happen. Why women were excluded from matters of the state? Like Aristotle said, he said in a woman, the deliberative faculty in the soul is present but ineffective. Like women had weak minds. He also said, Xenophon also said that women and men have memory in like degree, but that the female nature lacks intellectual strength. So that's why women were excluded from matters of the state. They believed that it was too sensitive a thing for creations with weak minds to handle. So that's why they were excluded. Well, today's woman exhibits more independence of thought. And today, a beautiful woman is it's not about the physical appearance anymore. It is now about what she carries on the inside. So the ideal woman today should still be modest, is confident, and is more intelligent beyond what is required for housekeeping. And she also exhibits a high degree of self-control, whether she's kept under lock and key or not. The Greeks believed that the woman's nature was dangerous to even herself, and it could cause a huge damage to the society. So all of the laws about the legal system and all the laws about women was to ensure that they bore legitimate children to their husbands. That way, the family fortune was passed down to younger generations in confidence. One thing that I found interesting was this belief that the Greeks believed that the woman is a virtuous embodiment of the home and the family. This is a contradiction to me when they said that she has no control over physical cravings, and then they use the word virtuous. So this contradiction, the Greeks, they tried to contain it by comparing women to horses. They said a woman's beauty, nobility, and likely wild nature would not be diminished by domestication, but can be enabled to flourish and serve others. So I know this is a sharp transition from women and marriage to death, but funeral rites were the only public things that women were allowed to do. That is why I have this on my presentation. The Greeks believed that once a person dies, the spirit leaves the body. And they placed a lot of importance on funeral rites because they believed it was an insult to human dignity for a body to be left unattended to. I think we still do. I do too. Well, it was, like I said, it was considered women's public duty. And also, it was like a display of family wealth when people died in ancient Greece. Like these two pictures are pictures of tombs, and obviously this is the richer family. So they would make expensive tombs and put personal items in it, sometimes jewelries and golds and precious stones, just to show how rich the family was or how important the person who died was. So Greek funerals were like it was a three-stage thing. The prothesis was the stage where the body would be washed and placed on an elevated surface like that, and the families would come around and weep and pay their last respect. The ekphoria was the funeral procession, and that's they will carry the body and the women will lead in front, and that was the only time that women led men in any procession. So they would take the body to the cemetery for burial, and if the body was cremated, they would take the ashes. And the third stage was, I won't try to pronounce it, but it was the part where they would come back, wipe their tears, dress up in festive clothes, and marry. They would celebrate the life of the deceased, and they also believed that the spirit of the dead was there with them. So I found this in a book here at the library, and it caught my attention because I'm a Christian. It said that according to Christian teachings, death offers a way of salvation and eternal rest. For a Christian, the prospects of life after death stands as a consolation for the awfulness of this life. It means that Christians believe that death is a way to rest, to eternal rest. Well, the documentation shows that the ancient Greeks were afraid of death. Like Achilles said, he would rather be a laborer on earth than be the king or the lord in the land of the dead. The Greeks also believed that there was a consequence for living a good or a bad life. They believed that when a person dies, it will go to either of two places. Either the Elysian fields, which was like the paradise, home of the good, or the Hades, which is a dark, scary place where the bad people will be tortured. They also believed that denying a person for a proper burial means that they would never find rest, and their spirit would just wander around in the underworld, would not go to the Elysian fields or to the Hades. So, do you have any questions?
Very interesting. We took it from child to the birth, to death. Any questions? I tell my students that you can't tell me that for an hour you listen to all these ideas and you have no question. That would be a problem. That would be a question. I have a question for you, please.
For me?
Yes.
Okay.
And you prepare your question if you like. We will have 2 minutes and then we'll leave, so don't worry. Where would you draw the line between imposing on children anything and be upbringing them or helping them in the proper way that we think is proper?
Well, we want to socialize children. That's the role of adults. But it's very easy to follow their lead. So I think as long as we follow the children's lead, and again, if we're teaching them, we're teaching them. If we're instructing them, we're instructing them. But if they're playing, they're playing. And so they learn through play. But as far as us imposing our views on them during play, we look down on that. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure if I understand.
Yes. There is a case that was seen, I think, when I came here first time 25 years ago. I saw that a mother and a father were sued by whoever, that they made their son 7 years, 8 years, to be able to go and join a college. They took his childhood, that's what he said, from 3 of age, and till 5 years of his childhood, they made him Einstein or something.
Yes.
So they sued them, some organization of child abuse or something.
Right,
said,
right.
You deprived, I remember the word, you deprived your child from his childhood.
Right.
How would you respond to that?
I would agree with that. I think we very much push children. And we push children because we think it's going to be best for them. And so we want our children to succeed. We want them to do well. And we feel like if we don't start early, they're going to be behind. And it's difficult, in mainstream society right now. So it's hard. It's hard for adults to step back from that. But I think people would be amazed by how much children learn just through daily interactions, reading to them, spending time with them. Actually, the number one indicator of future success of children is reading to them. That's the number one indicator. And they think that that's because of the fact that when you're reading to a child, you're either holding them or sitting close to them, so you're spending time with them, and there's language involved. You're talking to them. So children that are read to and are allowed to play tend to do better actually in school than children that are, drilled on their ABCs and things like that. So we're just mixed up on what causes children to learn more effectively.
Okay. I have 2 questions for Oyindamola, but I'll ask you another question. Anybody? I don't want to. Yes. Another question. Please say your name and then.
My name is Marshall McCoy, and my question was about the burial rituals. Do you know why or when cremation would be used? Like was cremation used in certain circumstances or for lesser privileged families? Do you know?
I think it was more of a choice. I think it was more of a choice because so far all the documents I read said they were either buried properly, the normal way, or they were cremated, depending on the choice of the family.
Of the father?
Of the family.
Of the family.
Yep.
And then along with that, why might somebody be denied burial?
Does someone else have Okay. I'm not sure, but I think it could happen.
I would say things like unclaimed bodies or people that didn't have family.
Right.
Things like that.
Yeah, all people who died are like warriors, die on the battlefield. It happens. Sometimes it happens way away from home, and they might never find the body. Unlike now, when the army would go and get the body and give it a proper burial and say, at least this is the remains that we have. But
well, along with that, what did they do with the children that they?
That was. I was going to ask that question too. Did you find anything about the burials of children as opposed to adults?
The burial of the exposed children or children who just died?
Either one.
Yeah, I found nothing concerning the burial of children, but I know that they found tombs with toys in it, which indicated that it was a child's tomb, which means children were given proper burials too. If they took time to bury them and put their toys in it.
I meant the exposed children.
If children were exposed, you know, basically it's like when I put my garbage out there, I don't pay any attention to what happens to it again. You know, I mean, they were just, and they were picked up and discarded just like any other garbage would be if they weren't claimed by somebody else. But see, sometimes they were claimed by childless women, you know, or by older women that, you know, their children were gone if they lived long enough, by enslaved families, you know, people like that. So the hope was that they would be claimed by somebody else, but of course that didn't always happen.
Have you read anything about like orphanages or some societies?
No, I didn't see anything like that.
So there was
No,
this
I
kind of-
didn't. No, there was a lot of taking in. You know, so when we say, you know, the baby was exposed, then, you know, it could die, obviously, especially depending upon, you know, what the weather was and you know, if it was hungry, how quickly it was rescued. But a lot of the idea was just this shifting around. Like, we didn't want it anymore, but a family of enslaved individuals might take it, you know, somebody else. But I didn't find anything related to orphanages or anything like that.
Why women in the funerals, they wear black? Was the black the color for sadness? Or?
No, it's a vase painting. So I guess most times the vases were orange, and black is a perfect color to show on orange. So I don't know the color they wore, but it says...
It looked to me like their dresses were black.
No, the
Because
painting was
painting
black.
was black. Okay. Okay. Cremation was well known, well practiced in ancient Greece from your readings?
Yes, it said either they were buried the normal way or they were cremated. So
did they get this from Southeast Asia or from Far East, from there, or it's kind of...
I believe it's a practice that they started.
Because what I read, I'm not sure of this kind of long time, I read that cremation came to America from South Asian Eastern religions and so forth. I'm not sure when was that, but this is okay. To you, what's wrong about or in telling, show grandma your ABCs?
What we advocate with children is that you don't do things with children that you wouldn't do with an adult. You know.
You would not.
Right. So we respect children
Who
as...
said this rule? Who said this rule? Who said that?
Me. No, it's part of developmentally appropriate practice, which comes out of my area in child development. And but I guess I don't know that I've ever said that way. But my idea is, like, you know, I don't come up to you and pat you on the head and talk about how cute you are. You know, it's insulting. You are cute, though. But it's insulting. You know what I mean? It's insulting to make people perform for our entertainment without a choice. And children, what they start doing is that's how they get their self-worth then. You know, and so that's why then I'll get students that'll come and say, I worked really hard on that, though, and I don't know why you gave me a D, because I worked really hard. You know, and so this idea that you're performing and everybody claps and you know, that kind of thing, it's not internally motivated. Now, if children just spontaneously, look what I can do, then it's extremely appropriate to say, oh, look what you can do. You can say your ABCs. But to put them on the spot to perform for us all the time is just disrespectful.
Did you have the same student who told me the same thing? And I told him, sir, you can, work hard and wrong. So sorry.
Yeah.
Another one told me I paid for that class and I have to get an A.
Yeah,
okay?
yes.
Thanks. So,
yeah.
Now, children without anything, 3 years, would run in the beach and say, Mommy, Mommy, look at me, look at what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
And let's face it, adults are being stars in the movies in Hollywood or being in the Congress or being in wherever.
Mm-hmm.
They do this for same old thing.
Right.
Mommy, see me.
Right, external.
So why do you think it's insulting to say how cute you are?
Well,
everybody wants to be not praised in a bad sense, but to be appreciated, to be acknowledged. It's
right,
natural.
and that's true. But so, for instance, I want to be appreciated for what I've accomplished. And so if I leave here tonight and somebody says to me, you know, I didn't really like that presentation, I don't get my self-worth from that. You know, I don't get my self-worth from other people's praise.
Yes, I agree.
And that's what we do to children when we
qualify
praise
it.
them.
I think it's too, I mean, this is right, and there's another side for it. It's, we would love to see that we were successful. We arrived to what we wanted. Because if somebody tells me your presentation was not good, so I really failed to convey. But when he honestly or she honestly would tell me, that was to the point, you drove it home, I'm really, so I feel that I'm accomplished, I achieved something, so.
Right, but young children can't filter that information the way adults do, and it just basically trains them to perform for us. Instead of choosing their own activities that please them, they're choosing things to entertain us. Do you see what I mean?